Another struggle that I've seen with cockapoos is probably, to a degree, I would say a lot of them, and this is not every dog, but a lot of them are quite strung, quite barky, quite reactive, quite bouncy, and I would say generally lacking confidence. Is that something you've seen or not?
Definitely, yes. Rupert has a voice and he's not afraid to use it. And it's definitely linked with a lack of confidence.
Welcome to the absoluteDOGS Sexier and Squirrel podcast. I'm Lauren Langman. I'm one of the world's leading dog trainers, and it's my mission to help owners become their dog's top priority. In each episode, you'll discover how to gain trust and communicate with your dog like never before, creating unbreakable bonds that make you the most exciting part of their world.
Hello and welcome to the Sexier and Squirrel podcast, the podcast that gives you real life dog training and sometimes the odd human result too. Now, Karen, we are talking cockapoos together today because I have never owned a cockapoo. And yet I know you've learned a lot about cockapoos since you have owned Rupert. Tell us a little bit about you, a little bit about Rupert, and a little bit about what you found to be cockapoos to date.
So I have had Rupert now he's 8 in August. So I've had him since he was a puppy. He's my first dog. He was definitely a wild introduction to dog ownership. And he was a choice, definitely. Cockapoo as a breed was a choice, backed by some research. Although I do think when you read websites that say cockapoos are typically friendly, outgoing, good with other dogs, hypoallergenic, and all the other things they say about cockapoos, unless you kind of read a bit deeper, you're maybe not getting the full picture of what a cockapoo can be in terms of its personality. I mean, he's brilliant. I love him. He's been a challenge.
And when you think about cockapoos, let's go into some of the little bits that we can think on. So things that could be typical to cockapoos or quirky and surrounding cockapoos. I'm going to start by throwing one in there and I'm going to say grooming. So grooming, typically, I really don't have to groom Tokyo. I really don't have to groom Tokyo. Tokyo's got a smooth coat. He keeps his own nails pretty well because he road walks and he keeps them pretty well, to be fair. And he doesn't really molt huge amounts and he definitely doesn't tangle. Now, I know with Rupert, grooming's been a problem and has been a challenge, and you've been brilliant at overcoming that and you've worked with an amazing groomer. However, it has been a challenge. Do you want to go into that a little and just explain some of the challenges that you've had with Rupert and his grooming?
Yeah, so I think when you get a cockapoo or any kind of doodly dog, you kind of know that grooming is part of the picture, because of the type of coat they have, and they do require regular grooming. So you either need to be able to do that yourself, or you need to be committed to sending them to a groomer quite regularly. And we did everything that you should typically do. So he went to a groomer quite early on. His first groom came up on my memories on Facebook quite recently. He ended up with some crazy mullet. He looked ridiculous. But it's definitely a commitment that you take on when you have a cockapoo. He is not a fan of being handled, which obviously makes grooming quite a challenge. I think grooming, unlike cuddling, which he loves, grooming is very intentional. You are doing something with a purpose. And you're maintaining a coat, which can get quite tangly, can get quite matted, and has to be maintained regularly to stop all of those things happening. And I found it quite a big withdrawal from our relationship, trying to groom him myself, even just kind of maintenance brushing at home, because he really didn't like it. And we tried lots of different things to get him to like it. So pairing it with lick mats and with food, standing him on higher surfaces so that it wasn't me coming down and grooming him in his kind of typical space. So all sorts of things to make it a kind of positive experience, but one that was not his typical. So now you're getting groomed, we're going to deal with this, we're going to make it a nice experience. It's going to be quite brief and we're going to do it regularly, and it's not going to be traumatic. But actually for him it is quite he just doesn't like it, he doesn't appreciate it. And what I found was that it wasn't worth the regular withdrawal from our relationship for me to groom him at home. So whereas I think generally being able to groom them at home is probably quite a good thing, for Rupert it's not. It's much better to go to a good groomer.
I think that's really important when you consider advocating for your own dog as you. Like, that doesn't mean that one size fits all. And you have actually been fortunate. And I say fortunate, but no, you're not just fortunate you go out of your way to find a really good groomer and you travel for your really good groomer. But what sort of things have you made sure you've put in place between you and your groomer? And that is, like I said, it's very cockapoo dependent, because a lot of dogs don't need any grooming. There are a lot of smooth-coated dogs that need no grooming at all. So they're going to be fine with no grooming. He does really need grooming. And therefore, how does that fit with finding someone? And how did you find the right person? And what sort of things are you looking for?
So I happened to come across my current groomer. She's not Rupert's first groomer. His previous groomer retired. And I was looking for a replacement. And I happened to see her on Facebook, and her kind of unique selling point, I suppose, was that she puts the experience of the dog above the groom. So if a dog goes in and is not happy, she won't finish the groom. The dog will go home, and she takes her time over the groom. So if it takes 4 hours because the dog needed 5 breaks from the table, that's how long it takes, and that's the way she works. And I felt that was really important for Rupert, because he doesn't appreciate being groomed, and he probably is the personality where he would stand and tolerate it with somebody else, where he won't stand and tolerate it with me. I don't really want him standing and tolerating something. I want him to go away and have as good an experience as he can have of something he doesn't really enjoy.
That's brilliant. And I think that is you advocating in a way that a lot of owners aren't able to even think about. And so I hope that just by listening, guys, if you're listening right now, please share that with a friend who has a dog that might need grooming, or has a dog that actually has real grooming problems and real grooming struggles. Because I think a lot of people are scared to advocate in that way, and scared to say, maybe this isn't the right experience for my dog. So I think for me, it's lovely having a dog that looks freshly groomed and really brilliant. But ultimately, a lot of dogs don't tolerate the stand. And you watch, I watched one of my groomers in the past when she's trying to get a knot out, and you're like, oh, it just looks a little bit brutal. And then Blink's sat there going, it's all right. But Blink's very tolerant, right? Like, she's tolerant. And do that to Tokyo. Thank goodness Tokyo can't get knots in his ears. He literally would be such a big baby about that situation. He'd be so upset. He'd be mortified at the whole situation. And so you can see how each individual dog, it would really change them into different sort of shapes and sizes depending on the dog, right? And I'm the same. Whilst it looks great to have a dog that is beautifully groomed, and I actually have no dogs that need grooming, which is quite nice. But if you had that or the experience of the dog, which one would you pick? You'd pick the experience every time. But most people don't get asked the question, because most groomers assume that you want the dog that's groomed.
Yeah, and I think his groom just before Christmas was a really good example of that. He went in, and for whatever reason, he was very matted. He normally isn't. And I think it's partly because we'd been down training with you, and he'd had his harness on a lot more than normal, which had kind of rubbed those harness lines. And then he seems to have a really funny coat, so that if it mats in one area, it then spreads. It's very odd. Anyway, for whatever reason, he was much more matted than normal. And she looked at him and said, I'm going to take it short, because I can't, it's not fair on him to try and deal with that. The best experience for him is to just go short, which was fine. And then she got to his face, which typically doesn't mat, and his face fur was all matted as well. And she sent me some pictures and said, what do you want me to do with this? I might need to shave it all off. And that was kind of my, that's his personality is all in his face. And ideally, I don't want it shaving off. But this was at the end of quite an extensive grooming session. She said, he's not going to tolerate me doing anything else. So your options are, take him away, bring him back another day, and I'll have another go at his face when he's in a fresher mood, or try it at home yourself and see how you get on, or we can shave it. So we decided to leave it, and I would try at home and then kind of check back in with her. And that's how we dealt with it. And I did actually manage to get those mats out at home, probably not to grooming standard, but that was the best outcome for him with that one. And it was just because I could have that conversation with her.
And I think it is right, isn't it? Having those open conversations, which actually so many people aren't willing to, or are worried to, or don't even want to ask the question. Sometimes we're so busy, it's kind of just hand the dog over, groom the dog, and go get the dog again. Like, it's not even like there's so many other things to consider. I had way too much information, but I had a very sore toe recently. So I went into like a chiropodist, or a foot doctor. And the whole time I was there, I was on my phone, and she was looking after my foot, and I was doing this, that, and the other. And then she was like, thumbs up at me, and I would do thumbs up at her, and out I went and clicked my phone and paid, and I carried on my conversation. And sometimes that is life, and it's definitely not the life I lived 20 years ago, but it is definitely the life I see myself living more and more now, the way that the world is, and the way that we're so busy, and technology is kind of taken over to a silly point, and social media is so mega. And suddenly you realize why, actually, you know what, you can see why those conversations don't happen, Karen, because those conversations take time and they take consideration and they take an owner that really is important and cares about it. Now, we've gone way down the route of grooming. Let's reel it back and let's go cockapoos. Another struggle that I've seen with cockapoos is probably, to a degree, I would say a lot of them, and this is not every dog, but a lot of them are quite strung, quite barky, quite reactive, quite bouncy, and I would say generally lacking confidence. Is that something you've seen or not?
Definitely, yes. Rupert has a voice and he is not afraid to use it. And it's definitely linked with a lack of confidence. So if somebody comes outside our house, that will trigger barking. I think because he's not sure whether that person's coming in or not. He's not barky outside of the house at all, actually, but inside the house, if he's feeling unsure about something, that will definitely be his way of expressing it. And that can be accompanied by bouncing.
And the other thing I would say that I've seen typically in cockapoos, and I think Games Club and all of what we do at absoluteDOGS can help here. But another one I would say I've typically seen is separation struggles. So I would say typically, and I think that links very much to the lack of confidence, the lack of independence, and the general like tolerance of frustration that they don't seem to have. I would say, and again, we're not saying everyone, we're saying a majority of what we see. And that is what we see, obviously, at training school. So these dogs are coming because they have struggles. Sighthounds often come because they chase fairy critters. Collies often come because they try and bite tires. Cockapoos often come because they lunge, bark, and don't like to be left alone. Like, we are typically seeing certain things. Would you say that's something you typically seen as well?
Yes, I can actually go out and leave him for a good few hours, although we did have to build up to that. What I can't do, though, which I think is kind of an extension of that same lack of skills, is I can't go outside and do stuff and he be aware that I'm around, but he's in the house and he can't get to me. So I can't go and work out in the garden, for example, and leave Rupert in the house.
Really, and that's such a great example, isn't it? Because I popped one of mine into we've got like a little pen downstairs, and I popped her into the pen yesterday when I was wandering around the house, and she just jumped out the pen, and I was like, wow, that was information. And the pen is like up to my chin, so it's not a little pen. And normally I put her in the one that's got a cover on top of it, but this time I just put her in the one without a cover on top of it, and I was like, okay. And it is that moment of being, if she was crated, she'd be okay, but she wasn't crated. She was in a pen, so she jumped out of it. Whereas I know Rupert isn't fine crated either. Like, he's not going to like you wandering around. Anyway, and I'd say that typically we've seen that. We're going to come up with some solutions in a minute. But again, one other thing I would say typically I've seen from cockapoos, I have seen a little more about mouthy biting and possibly even biting. So I have seen that probably more prevalent in cockapoos than say in greyhounds. And I'm not saying it's every cockapoo I've met, I'd say more of, and I'd say that comes from, for me, and again, we're always surmising, lack of sort of ability to disengage, and also tolerance of frustration and arousal up, arousal down. Like, they get themselves into a space, they don't have their dimmer switch, so they're not able to go a little bit down and just bring it down a notch or 10. They stay high, and their buckets fill quickly and they don't empty very fast. So very, very small hole, don't empty quickly. Tolerance of frustration for me definitely would be Rupert. What would you say here?
Yeah, definitely. Resource guarding, which I know a lot of cockapoos struggle with as well. Again, not to generalize, but I do in cockapoo groups, it's a recurring struggle that I see mentioned. And it's those same lack of skills, isn't it? Lack of ability to disengage from something, lack of a dimmer switch, unable to regulate their emotions and their arousal levels, and a lack of optimism. And we have had resource guarding incidents. We have had them to the point of a bite. Only me and my dad. And that's mostly through careful management and not putting him in situations where he feels the need to guard stuff, because that's not going to help him overcome that struggle at all. The one time that it was entirely my fault was when I dropped a £20 note on the floor and he took it, and there was no way I was letting him chew that £20 note, so I grabbed it, which is the worst thing to do, and I did get bitten.
Oh, Karen, it's such a isn't it? And it is that moment of, there's a £20 note on the floor, he's grabbed it, I'm having it, and it's just too quick, isn't it? It's all quick. It's quick. Now, Karen, I know you've done a brilliant job with him in so many ways, and I know sometimes with the things we've just described, you're like, oh my God, there's so many bad things. Well, how about the good things? Because there are a lot of good with owning a cockapoo like Rupert, and he's come on leaps and bounds, and through Games Club and through tricks and through all the things we do, he is really he's a knight in shining armor, because he's coming out like tops. And yes, you still have the challenges, but at the same time, they're so well managed and they're so well understood that I don't feel he's put in situations, or you are, that make him or you so uncomfortable these days. What would be some of your tips, tricks, hacks that you would give other cockapoo owners out there, to maybe give them a bit of a steady, it's okay, we got this? Like, what would you say were some of the things that you think, if I could teach again, these are where I'd start? Or if there were only a few things I could do, these would be some of them.
Definitely optimism, building optimism, and also helping a dog learn that bouncing head height in over arousal is not necessary in every situation. So working on that arousal and the dimmer switch and the ability to kind of pitch your excitement appropriately to the situation. And then alongside that, games that build those other skills that we were talking about, so disengagement and build some kind of tolerance of frustration, because those are the root of a lot of the struggles that we've been talking about. And then finding something fun to do. So for Rupert and I, that's tricks, because you've then got something that you are working on and enjoying together and doing as a team, which also has a purpose, because all of the tricks that Rupert and I work on build those skills that we were just talking about. And just remembering that you're enjoying each other, and not, I think, not getting fixated on this is a problem and this is a problem and we're never going to crack that, and oh, he does this and oh, he does that, and remembering to focus on all the fun things and the good things. He makes me laugh every day. He's such a comic. He's brilliant at cuddles. There are so many lovely, lovely things about cockapoos, and I think even ones with challenges like Rupert has, there'll be those things that you can reflect on and think, yeah, he's great.
And I definitely think that in terms of a partnership, your partnership is stronger and stronger through everything you do. And yes, I definitely agree, you've not had the easiest cockapoo journey. However, I think the partnership is there. Now, one thing I want to mention that I think it's probably just me, but one thing I see, and I see it very typically, the reds or the goldens seem to be more strung. And I would say the reds or the goldens, and I don't want to say any more than that's just a pattern I've seen. I would say that is something I typically would see. Am I completely going crazy here, or?
Well, Rupert is apricot coloured, so you're definitely not wrong on his personality. I don't know a lot of other cockapoos, actually. From what I see, the behaviour struggles that Rupert shows are not untypical of other cockapoos. But equally, I know that there are lots of people with lovely, calm ones, and ones who don't exhibit a lot of these struggles. And I always find it funny when I walk down the street and somebody says, oh, is that a cockapoo? Oh, haven't they got lovely personalities? Aren't they the greatest, kindest, calmest dogs? So obviously there are plenty of those out there as well.
And the funny thing is, Rupert actually looks like the model citizen. And at the same time, I know you've been through so much. Now, before we head out of here, how much have tricks really impacted your cockapoo? How much have they really changed the game for him?
They've made such a difference. He loves them. We enjoy doing them together. So they've definitely given me that focus of fun that I can have with him, and the kind of shift of mindset away from problems to fun, relationship building, skill building, something that you can do anywhere, really. They've also really grown him, I think, as a dog. When I was down training with you last time, or time before, we came down to do some heel whips music. And I had Rupert in the massive training arena, and I was convinced that if I let go of the lead, he was going to take the first opportunity to go laps of the arena, because he finds AstroTurf quite exciting and brilliant for a back rub and a roll around. He was so focused on me, he didn't leave me once, and we did quite a lot of off-lead work, and that's all through tricks and the kind of relationship and the skills that they've grown.
Mega, like really amazing. Now, guys, if you haven't picked up the tricks book, we really want you to get hold of a copy. And the tricks book, Karen, what would you say if anyone has a cockapoo out there and would like to consider the tricks book and are thinking about it, they're sitting on the fence?
Cockapoos love tricks. You only have to go on somewhere like Instagram and see the number of doodles and poodles and cockapoos that do tricks to know that really taps into their skills and the things that they find joyful. And they're such intelligent dogs that they really do love doing them. And if you have any behavior struggles with your dog, they're such a brilliant kind of joyful outlet and something that you can do together.
So I think you'd say you'd recommend it?
I definitely would, yes.
I know Rupert would too. Now, guys, if you want to get hold of that book, please head to our Absolute Dog store. Literally check out the Absolute Dog store and pop in the tricks book into your cart. When you get the tricks book, you can pop in trick 5, and that's going to give you £5 off the tricks book. And it's also going to give you a really cool free clicker as long as we've got them in stock. So you'll get both there. Tricks 5, you'll get the clicker and you'll get £5 off. Karen, it's been amazing to speak to you about cockapoos. I know there's so much more in the Games Club. I know that there's lots of videos of Rupert in the Games Club. I know there's loads of tricks that Rupert does tricks on a Tricks Tuesday. There's a lot that we can share and a lot that we can grow. We're celebrating cockapoos. That's cocker spaniels, that's poodles, that's all of the poo crosses, and so many other dogs. If you're a trainer, or if you're a fan, or if you're someone who hasn't ever had one and wants to know a bit more, please, please, please share this podcast. Make sure that all other cockapoo owners and all the doodles, poodles, crosses, and all of the dogs that might be able to be related to this are involved. And as a trainer, please share it with other trainers. It's really important we get this message out there. Karen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
We are really, really, really privileged to have the brilliant team that is Karen and Rupert. So thank you to them. And we will see you next time. I can't tell you too much about it other than it's going to be awesome, awesome, and even more awesome. Remember, stay sexy.